a devoted nanny, who dedicated her youth to caring for the frail triplet children of a Miami millionaire, is suddenly thrust into a horrific nightmare. She is accused of stealing the very life-saving medication the children need to survive each day. With no money, no lawyer, and no one on her side, Clara steps into the courtroom under the blinding glare of cameras and the cold, judgmental stares of onlookers. Everything seems predetermined. Justice becomes a stage where she is cast as the villain. But just when her last flicker of hope seems to fade, the courtroom door swings open. 3 small figures enter, one leaning on crutches, one in a wheelchair, one breathing weakly through an oxygen mask, and what they are about to say changes everything. The rhythmic hum of the ventilator echoes in the quiet room, like fragile drum beats tethering 3 tiny lives to the world. Clara leans down, adjusting the oxygen tube on one child's chest, then gently strokes their soft, silken hair. The child blinks faintly, lips trembling into a weak smile, a smile that warms her heart despite the exhausting months. This is Clara's life. No glory, no wealth, just sleepless nights, pages filled with medical notes, and unconditional love for the frail triplets of millionaire Adrian Velez. To the world, she is just a hired nanny. But to the children, she is a pillar, a second mother, hands that never let go. Years ago, Clara was a pediatric ICU nurse, accustomed to the wail of alarms and the urgency of life or death emergencies. Then, one rainy night, she failed to save a 4-year-old girl. That death weighed heavily on her mind, forcing her to leave the hospital. Clara swore never to return to the ER until Adrian came to her. His 3 children, afflicted with a rare muscular disease, needed someone patient and devoted to be by their side every hour. Clara agreed, not for money, but because she couldn't abandon those pleading eyes searching for life. From that day, she lived in the sprawling bayfront mansion in Miami, where Adrian's opulence stood in stark contrast to the children's fragility. Adrian was often busy with work and parties, appearing only for charity photo ops. People called him the exemplary father of special children. But in the long nights, it was Clara who stayed sitting by their beds, listening to every cough, changing medication bags, singing lullabies when pain kept them awake. The triplets, each with a distinct personality. Mateo, the eldest, sensitive, needing Clara's firm grip to feel secure. Luna, the smallest, brimming with imagination, whispering fairy tales to Clara before drifting off. Elias, the youngest, often grumpy, but the first to call her Mama Clara, a name that stuck through the years. To Clara, each dose of medicine was not just a drug, but a chance for the children to live another day. She understood their value. Each vial could buy a house, but when the trembling hands of the children held hers, money meant nothing. Only love and duty mattered. Then came that fateful morning. Clara was noting the used medication when the phone rang. Adrian's voice came through, low and firm. "Clara, come to my office now. We need to talk." A chill ran down her spine. His tone was different, not the usual distant coldness, but something darker, heavier. Clara folded the medical log, placed a hand on Elias's shoulder as if to steady herself, and slowly walked down the polished marble hallway. Portraits on the walls stared down at her with impassive eyes. The mahogany door at the hall's end was tightly shut. Clara took a deep breath, trying to shake off the ominous feeling. She had no idea that in just minutes, that door would open to a nightmare that could destroy her entire life. And before we continue the main story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and please comment below to let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. The door to Adrian Velez's office closed behind Clara with a heavy click, echoing in the vast space adorned with glossy walnut paneling. Light filtered through half-drawn curtains, casting thin streaks across the floor like cold blades. Clara stood there, hands unconsciously clenching, her heart beating faster than the ventilators she'd just left. Adrian sat behind his massive desk, his demeanor as composed as if he were chairing a board meeting. The walls displayed photos of him with politicians and plaques from medical charities. To the world, Adrian was a benevolent millionaire. But now, in this sealed room, he looked at Clara with eyes heavy with suspicion, like a judge with a verdict already in hand. "Clara," he began, his voice low and dry, "some of the medication is missing." She blinked, her breath catching. The words hit like a hammer to her mind. "Missing?" she repeated, her voice trembling, barely believing her ears. Adrian stood, circling the desk, closing the distance. Each step echoed on the wooden floor, amplifying an invisible accusation tightening around her. He stopped just feet away, his eyes darkening. Yes, and you're the only one with access to the secure fridge. The accusation landed like stones. Clara felt the room close in. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if she'd been trapped in a snare she hadn't seen coming. She shook her head frantically. No, I would never. Adrian, you know better than anyone. I live for those kids. I would never. He cut her off, his voice indifferent, as if reciting a rehearsed script. Those doses are worth millions on the black market. Anyone could be tempted, even a nanny. Clara was speechless. The nights she spent by the children's beds, holding their hands, were suddenly twisted into something despicable. She wanted to scream, to argue that her love for them outweighed any dollar amount, but her throat burned, her voice crumbling into silence. Adrian continued, his voice dropping lower, each syllable a verdict. No one else has the spare key. No one else knows the medication schedule. Do you think a court will believe you? I'm Adrian Velez. You're just a nameless nanny. Clara's eyes blurred. His words cut deep, not just threatening her freedom, but shattering the fragile trust she'd built with the children. The thought that they might believe she betrayed them was a pain beyond compare. In her desperation, Clara clung to reason. Maybe the hospital staff miscounted the deliveries. Maybe someone else accessed the storage. Maybe. But no. Adrian wasn't listening. He didn't want to. His eyes, posture, and tone revealed a terrifying truth. He had chosen her as the villain and would do anything to make it real. You'll hear from my lawyers, Adrian said, his voice slow and firm, like a final sentence. Then he turned, walking to the window, leaving Clara standing there like a fading shadow. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She backed away, opened the door, and left the oppressive room. The gleaming hallway was no longer familiar, it was a path to hell. Each step echoed like a countdown to ruin. As she passed the staircase to the children's rooms, Clara paused. She ached to run up, hold them, explain, tell them she was innocent. But an invisible force held her back, forcing her to turn away. If she went to them, their innocent eyes would only reflect more pain. Clara kept walking, her hands clutching the edge of her apron. She didn't know that the accusation was just the beginning of a far crueler nightmare. All right, dear audience, if you're watching and finding this story gripping, please comment 1 or I'm still here to keep listening. The next day, Miami woke to a bombshell. Tabloids, morning shows, and social media exploded with the headline, "Nanny Betrayal, Stealing Life-Saving Drugs from Rare Disease Triplets." The bold headline flashed across a screen, stopping Clara's breath as she glimpsed it in a small grocery store near her temporary apartment. Her face was plastered in bold, a grainy shot from an old photo. Her tired eyes and dark circles now evidence of guilt. Gone was the image of a woman cradling frail children. All that remained was a traitor. The news spread like wildfire. A national TV channel aired a panel discussion, the host declaring, "The worst part isn't the value of the drugs, it's the betrayal of trust." This wealthy father entrusted his children to a woman, and the cost was their lives. Each word stabbed Clara's heart. Outside, neighbors avoided her gaze. Some whispered as she passed. One shouted in her face, "Monster! How could you steal from those kids?" Online, it was worse. Thousands of comments flooded articles. "Lock her up. Heartless. Money over the lives of frail children." The cold words scrolled endlessly on her phone, making Clara feel like the entire world was condemning her. She tried to stay silent, focusing on memories of holding the children's hands through long nights, but the more she thought, the deeper the pain. Would they hear these accusations? Would those 3 small faces tremble, believing she betrayed them? The thought was suffocating. The news reached local live streams. Opportunists launched YouTube channels analyzing her suspicious behavior, even recreating scenes of her entering the medicine room using edited security footage. The clips, set to dramatic music, racked up hundreds of thousands of views. To the audience, truth no longer mattered. As long as the story was gripping, Clara was guilty. Meanwhile, Adrian appeared on TV, the picture of a grieving but strong father. He answered interviews with polished words. "My children are my priority. I trusted Clara like family, but the truth is too cruel. His words sealed her fate. The public believed him. They pitied the children and raged against the woman branded as the culprit. Clara sat alone in her empty apartment, the phone's glow illuminating her weary face. Each notification, each message, was a fresh wound. A few old friends texted, but only out of curiosity. No one truly believed her. No one stood by her. She clutched her head, trying to recall every detail, every day, every hour with the children. There was no moment of betrayal. She knew the truth, but the truth was drowning in a sea of money, power, and public opinion. In that moment, Clara realized something horrific. In court, she might prove the evidence false, but in the public's eyes, she was already convicted. Outside, car horns blended with the distant waves from the coast. The city buzzed on, but for Clara, the world had closed in. She wondered, if one day the children saw her branded a traitor on a screen, would they believe in the years she gave them her heart, or would they turn away like everyone else? And as Clara thought she was only facing the public, she didn't know the trial ahead would be far crueler. The courtroom was packed like a sold-out theater. Blinding camera lights shone on Clara's face, forcing her to squint as she entered. Whispers and the click of cameras blended into a noisy symphony of judgment. Here, silence wasn't peace, it was the anticipation of a tragic drama. Clara sat at the wooden defendant's chair. Her simple uniform looked out of place among the tailored suits of lawyers, prosecutors, and assistants. No one saw her as human. To them, she was a symbol of betrayal, a character in a story everyone wanted to end with a guilty verdict. Adrian entered like a hero stepping from the shadows. He strode in with a large legal team, his face calm, his gait confident. The crowd murmured, some nodding in admiration. The way he sat, whispering to his lawyers, exuded total control. No one could doubt him. When the judge entered, the room stood in unison. The sound of chairs scraping the floor rang like a chorus. Clara stood too, her legs trembling as if they weren't hers. Her heart pounded, each beat trying to escape her chest. The trial began. The prosecutor's voice rang out, steady and confident, painting a chilling picture of a nanny who abused trust to steal million-dollar drugs. Stacks of evidence boxes appeared, photos and security footage displayed on a large screen. Images of Clara entering the medicine room, the grainy monochrome light making her every move suspicious, though it was just her daily routine. Each piece of evidence sparked murmurs from the crowd. Some shook their heads, others shot contemptuous glances at Clara. Under the spotlight, her face paled, cold sweat trickling down her temple. All her sacrifices, sleepless nights, and moments cradling the children through pain were twisted into a crime. She was called to speak. Stepping to the stand, her hands gripped the wood until her knuckles whitened. She opened her mouth, but her voice faltered in the vast space. She tried to speak of love, care, years of devotion, but her words were swallowed by the room's skepticism. Before she could finish, the judge interrupted, demanding she focus on facts, not feelings. Clara returned to her seat, her face flushed with shame. The crowd remained unmoved. They had judged her before she spoke. In that moment, Clara realized this was no longer a place for justice. It was a public stage where she was the pre-written villain. Adrian was the betrayed father, and she just a poor nanny with no voice. She took a deep breath, her eyes welling, and glanced at the rows behind her. No familiar faces, no support. She was utterly alone in a sea of strangers. And as the trial paused, Clara understood a horrific truth. She wasn't just fighting the law. She was fighting a script written to destroy her. When the trial resumed, the room was thick with an air that felt predetermined. The jury sat neatly, pens ready, their eyes cold like mirrors reflecting indifference. Clara sank lower in her chair, hands clenched, nails digging into her skin, clinging to the feeling that she still existed. Adrian's lawyer stood, slowly stepping to the center. Without raising his voice, he spoke firmly, each word a hammer strike. "We have evidence." A large screen lit up. Security footage appeared. Grainy, monochrome, but clear. Clara, her familiar figure, entering the cold storage room. She opened the cabinet, leaned in, and left with something in her hand. The footage looped, zoomed in on her hand, gripping the metal handle. The room buzzed with whispers. Some gasped, Others shook their heads. The looks piercing Clara were like sharp knives. She wanted to scream that the footage lacked context. It was one of countless times she checked the medicine, ensuring the children never missed a dose. But to the crowd, that blurry image was undeniable proof. Before she could catch her breath, the lawyer produced a thick file, black cover, red label, as if it held a person's fate. He opened it, passing sheets to the judge and jury. Bank statements, cold numbers, transactions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, deposited into an account under Clara Ferrer's name. The dates aligned perfectly with the missing doses. The room fell into a terrifying silence. No more whispers, just the scratch of pens and the faint tap of the judge's gavel. Clara's face drained of color, her hands trembling, her mouth open but voiceless. She had never opened that account, never seen those transactions. Everything was arranged so meticulously that even she felt like she was staring at evidence against herself. A chill ran down her spine. Someone had crafted this entire story, every frame, every number, every detail. It all fit together like a perfect trap waiting for her to fall in. The judge tapped his gavel, calling for silence. His eyes were heavy, not angry but full of doubt. In that moment, Clara realized a horrifying truth. Adrian wasn't alone. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan carefully prepared long ago. In the audience, some whispered. Pens tapped on notepads. Reporters typed furiously, sending out fresh headlines. Nanny paid for stolen drugs. Undeniable evidence. Clara closed her eyes, trying to find her breath. Memories of sleepless nights with the children flashed through her mind, moments so real no one could fake them. But those truths were being choked by false papers and videos. When she glanced at Adrian, she caught his eyes. Cold, calm, almost at ease. He didn't need to speak or command. Everything was unfolding exactly as he wanted. Dear audience, are you still here? Take a moment to relax, maybe grab a glass of water, and keep listening to this gripping story. Comment 1 if you're hooked, and don't forget to subscribe. The courtroom air was thick as fog, each second heavier than the last. After the fake bank statements were presented, the judge nodded for the first witness to take the stand. A middle-aged woman in a dark dress stepped forward. Clara recognized her instantly. Mrs. Lopez, the former housekeeper who once worked alongside her in the mansion. She had stayed up with Clara through long nights, brought her water when she was exhausted, and seen her wipe the children's fevered brows. Now, she stood there, hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. But her words fell like cold stones. Clara was always too attached to the children, she said evenly. Sometimes I thought it wasn't normal. She'd stare at the medicine vials in the cabinet for a long time, and I remember her once saying, "This drug is worth more than a house." A wave of murmurs rose. Every eye burned into Clara like fire. A casual remark she'd made in awe was now twisted into proof of greed. Clara wanted to leap up and protest that it was just a passing comment, but her voice choked, as if stolen from the start. The next witness was a nurse who occasionally visited the mansion for treatments. He stood tall, his face stern, avoiding Clara's gaze. I remember Clara asking detailed questions about the drug's dosage, storage, and value. For a nanny, I found her curiosity unusual. Clara sat frozen. Curiosity? It wasn't curiosity, it was responsibility. She learned every detail to ensure the children's safety. But those explanations had no place in this room. Another witness followed. A distant relative of Adrian's who visited the mansion a few times. He claimed Clara seemed restless on days the medicine arrived, that she lingered near the storage area more than necessary. Vague memories, baseless assumptions. But in this heavy atmosphere, they became truth. Clara bowed her head, hands trembling. Each testimony was a knife slicing into her memories, turning acts of care into distorted crimes. She remembered nights sitting by the children, counting their breaths, adjusting ventilators, wiping their brows. But in the witnesses' mouths, it all became evidence of a dark scheme. The prosecutor didn't need much. He stood there, nodding, letting each testimony fall, each detail a nail sealing Clara's fate. The crowd whispered, their faces set in condemnation. Clara scanned the room for a friendly glance, a hint of doubt. But everyone had chosen a side. She felt trapped behind a glass wall, screaming but unheard. For a moment, she recalled the children's eyes. When they called her Mama Clara, their gaze was full of trust. Their hearts knew the truth, but this place didn't care. As the final witness left the stand, Clara sat motionless. None had lied outright. They merely twisted memories, piecing together fragments enough to turn her life into a tale of betrayal. The courtroom air was heavy as concrete hanging over Clara's head. All eyes turned to the prosecutor as he slowly approached the stand, carrying a new, thick file. The sound of flipping pages was crisp, like lashes striking at her remaining fragility. No one knew exactly what was coming, but all felt the chill signaling a fatal blow. Then the large screen at the front lit up. Harsh white light hit Clara's face, making her squint as the room's attention locked onto the images. No longer blurry videos or cold bank statements. This time, it was stark, sharp text, screenshots of text messages. The words appeared line by line, cold and precise, haggling over prices, deal agreements, instructions to keep things secret. Beneath each, a familiar name in bold, Clara Ferrer. The phone number matched hers from years ago. Not a single detail was out of place. Every word, every number, seemed crafted to push her to the brink. The room erupted in soft gasps, whispers, shaking heads, looks of disgust. No one cared if the messages could be faked. To them, the match was too perfect, too convincing. They had seen all they needed to judge. Clara sat frozen, her spine like stone. Her body rebelled with a racing heart, shivers running down her back. She knew those messages never existed. She had never typed those soulless words. But staring at the screen, even she felt like she was facing a warped version of herself. A greedy figure built from fabricated pieces. This was no longer doubt. It was a conviction. Videos could be misinterpreted. Bank statements could be errors. But text messages with her name and number, they were too easy to swallow. In that moment, Clara realized every step had been calculated, flawless. The footage, the papers. Now the messages, they formed a perfect portrait of guilt she couldn't break with words. Pens tapped from the jury's table. They scribbled, faces blank, none glancing at Clara. To them, the case now had a complete script. Her presence was just a minor detail. Clara dug her nails into her palms until they stung, clinging to sanity. In her mind, images of the children flashed those trusting eyes, weak but genuine smiles. The times they called her Mama Clara in panicked nights. Now, those same children might see these messages in the news, believing she sold them out for money. That thought stabbed her heart deeper than any fake evidence. Outside the tall windows, Miami's sky was deep blue, afternoon sunlight streaming through, but Clara felt no warmth. Everything was ice. She heard reporters typing non-stop, new headlines forming as the screen glowed. Nanny's secret black market drug deals. Messages reveal shocking truth. To the media, this case was no longer about justice. It was a blockbuster drama drawing millions. The prosecutor said little. He stood, nodding, lips curling in satisfaction. Everything he wanted was etched into the audience's minds. This evidence, real or fake, was enough to crush any resistance. Clara sat silent, tears brimming but not falling. Despair no longer surged in screams. It became a thick, silent weight, as if she'd exhausted all strength to fight. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just in a trial. She was being buried alive in a play someone had directed long ago. And the audience, every person in the room, had bought tickets to watch her fall. The air stilled for a few final seconds as the screen dimmed, leaving a faint glow on the wood. Clara closed her eyes, seeking a normal breath, but felt her chest tighten. She thought she'd hit rock bottom, but a chilling fear whispered that the worst was yet to come. The courtroom settled after the fake messages were revealed. Everyone was certain of Clara's guilt. No one noticed her gasping breaths or trembling hands clutching her skirt. The air felt ready to freeze. Then, unexpectedly, the back door creaked open. The long squeak of hinges echoed in the silent room, turning every head. In that moment, no one expected change to come from there. But then, 3 small figures appeared at the threshold, carrying a light the room had forgotten. The first moved slowly, each step laborious, leaning on crutches under thin arms. Every motion drained their strength, but their eyes blazed with unbelievable resolve. Beside them, the second rolled a motorized wheelchair, hands gripping the armrests for balance. Their frail heart couldn't stop their will to move forward. Finally, the third, the frailest, carried a small oxygen tank, breaths shallow through a clear mask. 3 fragile bodies, 3 delicate lives, but their steps silenced the entire room. The cold atmosphere melted before them. People forgot the prosecutor, forgot Adrian, forgot the evidence just presented. All eyes locked on the 3 children who shouldn't even be here. Clara froze. She thought she was dreaming, for just this morning, they were still in their familiar bedroom, surrounded by tubes and nurses. Now, by some strength, they were here, summoning courage to enter a world of judgment they should have been shielded from. Each meter forward was a battle. The soft grind of wheelchair tires on wood, the dry clink of crutches hitting the floor, steady despite the effort. The rhythmic, urgent breaths through the oxygen mask. The 3 sounds merged into a heroic anthem, echoing in a room used to gavels and accusations. The audience stood still. No one dared speak. This silence was different from the heavy quiet before. It was awe, respect, and emotion surpassing reason. Some reporters lowered their cameras instinctively. Even the judge, stern from the start, paused his pen, his eyes alight with rare focus. Clara's chest tightened, tears spilled, unstoppable. She wanted to run to them, hold them, but her feet felt rooted. She didn't want to break this moment, the moment the world finally saw the undeniable truth. No defense needed. Adrian, the man who sat like he controlled everything, lost his composure for the first time. He leaned forward, eyes wide, face flushed, unable to hide shock and fear. He knew this wasn't in his plan, and that threw everything into chaos. As the children reached Clara, the room held its breath. One dropped their crutches, trembling arms wrapping around her waist. Another reached out a frail, cold hand to grasp hers. The third looked up, eyes sparkling through the misty oxygen mask. No one spoke, but the message was clear. They chose her. Clara knelt, embracing all 3, sobbing. It wasn't just a nanny's embrace. It was the embrace of a mother misjudged by the world, yet unwavering in her love. And now, that love became the strongest evidence, truer than any video or message. In that moment, the courtroom shifted. The tension tore apart. Walls of power, money, and deceit shrank before 3 frail but brave figures. The accusations, thick indictments, venomous articles, all faded. No rallying cry was needed, no grand declaration. The truth entered the courtroom on trembling legs, an old wheelchair, and gasping breaths. And that truth, however fragile, was strong enough to change everything. The courtroom, once noisy, fell silent as the triplets sat at the witness stand. Their presence alone had altered the room's heartbeat. But what came next was the dagger piercing the veil of lies built over days. The judge leaned forward, his voice low but softened, unlike his earlier coldness. He asked if they were strong enough to speak. 3 small, frail but resolute nods, as if it were a duty they had to bear. Court staff carefully adjusted the microphone, placing a glass of water nearby, but none reached for it. They didn't need water. They needed the world to hear the truth. The eldest, leaning on crutches, took a deep breath. His thin shoulders trembled, but his voice rang clear, each word striking the walls. He spoke of that night, unable to sleep, hearing noises near the medicine room. Through a crack in the door, he saw a figure leave, not Clara. It was a woman in business attire, carrying a medicine box, glancing around before vanishing down the hall. The room stirred with whispers, but the judge raised a hand for silence. All eyes locked on the boy, unwavering. The second, in the wheelchair, continued. His voice was weaker but firm. He confirmed seeing the same scene from his room's angle. The click of high heels, the lingering scent of perfume, the hurried steps. It wasn't Clara, the one they called Mama. Clara never left their room at night, except to check their temperature or help them breathe. The youngest, breathing heavily through the oxygen mask, adjusted it with trembling hands. Despite labored breaths, he spoke, his small voice ringing like a bell in the minds of those present. He told of nights Clara stayed up, sitting by their beds, holding their hands until pain eased. He stressed, never, not once, did they see her take anything but her own exhaustion. Simple words, not grandiose, but so true they couldn't be denied. Clara sat still, hands gripping the chair. Tears fell steadily, But she didn't wipe them. She let them flow, another testament to the truth the children bravely spoke. The room trembled. Some lowered their heads, ashamed for believing the accusations. Others quietly dabbed tears. Even hardened reporters slowed, pens pausing, eyes misty. They knew they weren't just witnessing a trial. They were seeing a battle between lies and truth, where the frailest witnesses were the strongest. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, not to interrupt but to mark each word. He scribbled carefully, eyes fixed on the children. Their plain testimony shook the wall of fabricated evidence the prosecution had built. Adrian, across the room, lost control for the first time. He tried to hide it, but his anxious eyes, clenched fists, and sweat on his brow betrayed him. The man who sat like a king now looked like someone teetering on the edge. The children continued, unhurried. Each word was a needle tearing through the silence. They spoke of Clara delivering medicine on time, meticulously logging every detail, leaving only when they slept soundly. They didn't embellish or defend. They spoke the truth, and its simplicity became an overwhelming force. The room felt a shift. Something invisible but powerful turned the tide. Blind faith in money and power gave way to the truth spoken from trembling lips. As their testimony ended, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. No one dared breathe loudly. The judge set down his pen, his eyes reflecting a rare contemplation. Everything had changed, and everyone knew there was no going back. But their testimony was just the spark, for right after, another shocking truth emerged, revealing the mastermind behind it all, right within Adrian's ranks. The courtroom froze after the children's testimony. Their words lingered, heavier than the judge's gavel. Clara sat still, her hands still held by the three small ones. For the first time since the trial began, warmth spread in her chest. But the silence didn't last. It was the calm before a storm. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, his voice lower, no longer detached. He asked the prosecution to address the mysterious figure the boys saw. A name drifted through the room like a cold breeze. Claudia Mendez, Adrian's personal lawyer. All eyes turned to her. Claudia sat, trying to stay composed, but her hands on the table trembled slightly. Before, she led the attack on Clara with sharp confidence. Now, silence betrayed her, turning every second into evidence. Court staff presented a file of medical records and drug transport logs. The judge flipped through, noting mismatched numbers, repeated signatures, clumsily altered dates. He read key details aloud, his voice steady but cutting. The room wavered. An unexpected witness was called a hospital employee. He recounted seeing Claudia in the rare drug storage area months ago, outside protocol. He vividly recalled her voice negotiating with two strangers about moving product and top price. His testimony was a spark in a powder keg. The room exploded in murmurs. Clara clutched her chest, her heart pounding. For days, she bore every blame, branded with horrific acts. Now, the truth began to emerge. But the pain didn't lessen, it grew, knowing this was a meticulously planned scheme, with her as the scapegoat. Claudia stood shakily, her voice trembling, insisting it was a misunderstanding. But her excuses burst like soap bubbles under hundreds of scrutinizing eyes. The judge demanded she explain her presence near the drug storage that night. Her answers conflicted, first a wrong turn, then hearing a noise. The ambiguity fueled the room's anger. Adrian sat beside her, his face taut. He tried to maintain calm, but as evidence mounted, he leaned forward, whispering urgently to Claudia. She avoided his gaze. The air between them was heavy as lead. The judge paused, looking directly at Claudia. He declared a separate investigation into her for fraud and drug theft. His gavel struck, its dull thud echoing in every corner. Some in the audience held their breath, others exhaled loudly. The atmosphere had shifted. Clara felt the change. No one looked at her as a criminal anymore. Their eyes turned elsewhere, to Claudia and to Adrian. The man once untouchable now seemed isolated. Everything he built, power, influence, reputation, cracked before their eyes. But deep down, Clara felt no triumph. Her heart swirled with relief that the truth was emerging, pain from days of unjust torment, and uncertainty about the murky future. The trial wasn't over, the verdict not yet given. But she knew. The nightmare had shifted. The room buzzed with chatter. Reporters who once wrote damning headlines now typed new ones. Some in the audience whispered, some ashamed, others angry. The fragile but unbreakable truth had begun to pierce the veil of power over the trial. Clara held the children's hands, whispering silently. No words were needed. They squeezed back, giving her strength. In that moment, she knew. The truth had allies, and this time, it wouldn't be buried easily. But as all eyes turned to Claudia, Adrian stood abruptly. His next move stunned the courtroom and thrust Clara into a new, more dangerous spiral. The courtroom air remained thick as smoke, heavy with the revealed testimony and evidence. Claudia sat rigid, pale, avoiding every gaze. The room seemed to aim spears at her, awaiting her judgment. In that tense silence, Adrian suddenly stood. The scrape of his chair on the stone floor echoed, chilling the room. All eyes locked on him, the man once a symbol of cold power, now radiating an indescribable tension. He didn't sit quietly like Claudia. He wasn't about to let control slip from his grasp. Adrian stepped from the row, his leather shoes striking the floor with resolve. Each step carried the weight of determination. He held his head high, but cracks appeared on his face, anger, fear, desperation, mingling. Stopping, he faced the judge, slamming his hand on the wooden table, rattling papers. For a moment, the room held its breath. Clara felt blood rush to her temples, her hands tightening around the children beside her, fearing what was coming. She knew Adrian, he never backed down. When power was threatened, he'd strike back, no matter how. Adrian inhaled deeply, then spoke. His voice boomed, low but trembling, like a man cornered. He boldly claimed he knew nothing of Claudia's actions, that she orchestrated the entire scheme. He admitted fault for trusting her, giving her access to sensitive areas and drug records, but insisted he was blameless. His words cut the air like a blade, trying to sever the suspicion tightening around him. But in the room's eyes, his sharpness lost its edge. It felt like a desperate grasp, a drowning man clutching at driftwood. The judge sat silent, his gaze piercing. He didn't interrupt or nod. He let Adrian expose himself with every word. Adrian pivoted. He stressed he was the father, the only one with the right to protect his children. He painted a picture of a father's fear when drugs vanished, his desperation to find the betrayer. He said his actions, even accusing Clara, stemmed from love for his children. A love, he claimed, that sometimes demanded cruelty. His words poured out, forceful, but Clara heard them as hammer blows to her memories. She recalled his cold accusations, his indifferent eyes when she pleaded, the times he used power to silence her. Now, he donned the mask of a sacrificial father. In that moment, she wasn't afraid. She felt hollow. The room stirred. Some nodded, moved by the image of a suffering father. Others frowned, sensing the strain in his words. The air split, like a crack running through the floor. The judge set down his pen, tapped the table, and looked at Adrian. He asked, if truly uninvolved, why did all the fake evidence, edited videos, bank accounts, messages come from Adrian's legal team? How could a father just protecting his children let such tactics become weapons against a woman devoted to his kids for years? The question thundered. Adrian faltered. For a moment, his confident facade crumbled, revealing a flushed face and evasive eyes. The room erupted, whispers turning sharp. The defense he'd built began to fracture in a single strike. Clara watched silently. She didn't cheer inwardly or sigh in relief. She knew Adrian had more cards to play. He wasn't one to give up easily. And true enough, he did the unthinkable. He turned, pointed at Clara, and his voice rang like a gavel. He accused her of brainwashing the children, claiming their blind affection clouded their judgment. He painted Clara as a manipulator, exploiting their weakness to turn them against their own father. The accusation was a sharp, venomous dagger. The room gasped. Some shook their heads, others whispered skeptically. Clara's heart stung, but the children's eyes held her steady. They didn't let go. They squeezed tighter. A silent vow not to leave her alone again. The room brimmed with tension. On one side, Adrian powerful, angry, desperate. On the other, Clara and the children fragile but upheld by truth. The trial was no longer about charges. It was a battlefield where power and love clashed head-on. Just when it seemed the tide might turn back to Adrian, a new witness appeared, bringing the final piece that could shift the scales of justice. The courtroom was in chaos after Adrian's accusation. Whispers crashed like waves against the walls. Some faces showed confusion, as if swayed by his commanding tone. Clara sat trembling but unbowed. The children held her hands, their eyes like small lanterns in a storm. The judge slammed his gavel, silencing the chatter. He looked at Adrian, his voice calm but weighty. Your accusations need evidence. Without it, they're just empty echoes. The room stilled, but the tension tightened like a noose. Then, the courtroom door opened again. The hinges' squeak drew every eye. A tall, thin man in a worn hospital coat stepped in. His face was tired, but his eyes burned with resolve. No one expected him. Some recognized him instantly. The Triplet's primary doctor, rarely seen in public. He walked forward slowly, each step carving into the stone floor. At the stand, he removed his glasses, his voice low but far-reaching. I'm here to tell the truth that's been hidden too long. Without introduction, the room held its breath. The doctor began. He spoke of years monitoring the children's condition, the strict protocols for importing rare drugs. Then, lowering his voice, he looked at Claudia. He confirmed seeing her repeatedly in the rare drug storage, signing unauthorized documents. He had suspected, but every report he filed was blocked by Adrian himself. The room felt struck by lightning. The puzzle pieces snapped together. Claudia couldn't have acted alone. Behind her was a hand paving the way, and that hand was Adrian Hale's. Adrian yanked at his tie, his face flushed, eyes darting for an escape. He tried to stand and protest, but the judge signaled silence. He let the doctor continue. The man produced a small yellowed file, edges worn. He said it was an original hospital backup, untampered evidence. It detailed unauthorized drug withdrawals, Claudia's signatures, and one order redirected by Adrian Hale. The room exploded. Whispers became roars, some gasping uncontrollably. Reporters snapped photos, scribbling furiously, sensing tomorrow's front page. Clara sat stunned, tears streaming. All the days of bearing false blame, the nights curled up feeling abandoned, converged in this moment. She felt no triumph, only deep relief. Finally, the truth had a voice, and it couldn't be silenced. The children looked up, eyes shining. They knew they weren't alone in defending Clara. An adult had stepped into the light, placing justice above power. Adrian stood frozen, hands on the table, body rigid as if about to collapse. The confidence and authority that once cloaked him were now a warped shadow. The room no longer saw a powerful billionaire. They saw a man stripped bare, with nowhere to hide. The judge slammed his gavel. His voice boomed, stern. This witness will be further examined, but the preliminary evidence is sufficient to consider criminal liability for both Claudia Mendez and Adrian Hale. The room surged like a tidal wave. Clara closed her eyes, gripping the children's hands. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she whispered to herself, I didn't fight for nothing. Adrian remained motionless for a long moment after the doctor's evidence. His face flushed, veins bulging at his temples, as if rage threatened to tear his final mask. The room's eyes pierced him like thousands of needles. Everything seemed over, but Clara knew Adrian never surrendered while he had a move left. And then, he stood, no longer calm or commanding. His eyes flared with desperation. A man used to power, cornered, would do anything to regain control. Adrian slowly opened his leather briefcase on the table. The sharp click of the lock echoed, chilling the room. He pulled out a thick, black-bound file, setting it on the table like a final card. The air tightened, all eyes on his every move. He looked up, his voice low but sharp as a blade. If you want the truth, I'll give you the truth. Not just about me, not just about Claudia, but about Clara. Whispers spread. Clara felt blood pound in her temples, her heart racing. The children squeezed her hands, their faces anxious. Adrian opened the file, revealing papers, photos, even old video clips. He claimed it was Clara's secret history, details no one in the room knew. He said she'd been in debt, involved in a minor lawsuit, had a period of mental distress, fragments of a normal life, now inflated into unfit character evidence. Each word was a slashing blade. Some in the room frowned, others whispered skeptically. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. Adrian knew how to sway opinion, and he was playing his last card by sowing doubt. Clara sat, eyes wide. She didn't deny his words, though twisted, were rooted in pieces of her past, those scars she never wanted to revisit. but hearing them warped, weaponized to negate her present, felt like being stripped bare in public. Seeing the wavering looks, Adrian grew bolder. He shouted that Clara was no saint, that she exploited the children's frailty to craft a sacrificial mother image. He said trusting her was like trusting someone who'd lost their way. The room wavered again. Some susceptible minds murmured. That was Adrian's goal, not to win outright, but to muddy the truth enough to dilute it. Clara bowed her head, hands trembling. She wanted to speak, but her throat locked. Any defense now would sound like an excuse. She felt darkness flooding, drowning the fragile light the children and doctor had sparked. But then, the youngest's small hand squeezed tighter. Through the oxygen mask, his eyes met hers, shining, reminding her, "You're not alone." The eldest, on crutches, glared at Adrian with defiance. The one in the wheelchair nodded, urging her to stand. In that moment, Clara knew her past couldn't be erased, but it didn't define her now. Scars weren't proof of guilt, they were witnesses to her survival, her falls, and her rise. The room roared with Adrian's shouts, but some began to hear desperation in his voice, not the power of a protective father, but the cry of a man losing everything. That subtle difference made some near the front shake their heads. The judge tapped his pen quietly. He let Adrian exhaust his words, then spoke. "We will review this file. But this trial isn't about the past, it's about the truth of the present." His words cut like ice, breaking Adrian's final assault. The room fell silent. He stood, panting, sweat soaking his brow, hands trembling. His ace was played, but instead of crushing his opponent, it exposed his desperation. The courtroom remained heavy after Adrian's last stand. The black file lay exposed on the table, a testament to a desperate game. But as court staff reviewed it, a shocking truth emerged. The papers Adrian presented turned against him. An independent auditor was called. He flipped through pages, comparing signatures, seals, dates. His voice was calm but clear. "Your Honor, many documents in this file are altered. Clara's signatures were copied. Some papers were created digitally, not originals." Whispers filled the room. Cameras flashed. All eyes turned to Adrian. His face flickered, but he tried to stay composed. He claimed he found the documents and thought they incriminated Clara. But now, he was the one who brought fake evidence to court. The judge folded his arms, his gaze icy. "Mr. Hale, do you realize the gravity of this? This is no longer a civil case. This could be obstruction of justice." The words rang like a death knell. Adrian stood frozen, eyes darting for an escape, but there was none. His former allies, lawyers, guards, even friendly reporters averted their eyes. Clara sat, clutching the children's hands. The fear of days past gave way to relief. No need to shout or defend, the truth spoke for itself. The judge took a deep breath and declared, "After reviewing all evidence, witness testimonies, and the newly uncovered fraud, this court declares, Clara Ferrer is not guilty. All charges against her are dismissed immediately." The words echoed like thunder. For a moment, Clara thought her legs would give way. Tears flowed, not from fear, but from the lifting of a crushing burden. The children squeezed her hands tighter. One looked up, eyes wet but bright. "I told you, Mama, it'd be okay." The whisper was small but clearer in Clara's heart than any verdict. The room erupted. Some stood, clapping softly. Some reporters dropped their pens, wiping tears. The heavy air of days past dissolved, replaced by collective relief. And Adrian? He stood alone, a ghost in the crowd. The pride that once dominated the room was now a hollow shell. As police approached, he didn't resist, but his eyes burned with rage. The trap had closed, and he knew he couldn't escape. Clara didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. He had destroyed himself. As she left the courtroom, sunlight poured over the steps. Clara walked slowly, flanked by the three children. The crowd was thick, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. But this time, no accusations. They called her name with respect. They wanted to hear the story of a woman pushed to the edge yet standing tall, of love triumphing over power. Clara only smiled faintly. No need for grand speeches. In that moment, she was no longer the poor nanny, wrongfully accused. She was a symbol of truth. The children called softly, "Mama Clara." The words echoed, silencing the crowd. Some cried, some clapped. Those two simple words held everything: recognition, love, and final victory. Clara knelt, kissing each child's fragile hair. She knew the road ahead was still hard, their illness lingered, and life was just beginning. But at least, they'd walk in truth, no shadows looming. On the courthouse steps, amid cheers and blinding sunlight, Clara held her head high. She didn't need to prove anything more. Justice had spoken, and this time, the world listened. As the courtroom doors closed behind her, Clara felt like she'd emerged from an endless nightmare. On the steps, amid the media's clamor, she quietly hugged the children tightly. No more accusations, no more doubtful stares. Instead, there was the warmth of love and respectful looks from strangers. Clara knew life wouldn't easily return to normal. The children's illness remained, and the scars from these days wouldn't fade quickly. But they were no longer alone. They had each other, and they had the truth, a weapon stronger than any money or power. Adrian, once holding the room in his grip, was now a fading figure, caught in the law's spiral and public disdain. But the story wasn't truly over. Greedy hands still lurked, and those who twisted justice into a tool hadn't all been exposed. Clara knew this was just the start of a longer, larger battle. Yet, when the children called Mama Clara in the fading daylight, she knew she'd won what mattered most: their love and trust. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going.